Good evening. Welcome to the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry's Business Review magazine. This television program is an initiative of the GCCI to bring to the fore national topical events that affect the private sector in general and members of the Chamber in particular. My name is Lanc. Hinds. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the moderator for this evening's program. Our focus this evening will be on intellectual property legislation in Guyana as it stands today. Many of you would remember the contretemps last year with the unauthorized production of school books for sale and distribution in our schools. Many stakeholders raised serious concerns about the practice. The government stated their initial position on the issue, which was later modified. There was a court case brought by the importers of the original books in conjunction with the overseas publishers. The government of Guyana then undertook to work with the publishers to find a solution that was workable for all parties. We believe, however, there's a larger issue at hand. Throughout the region is a clarion call for the ICT-driven and knowledge-based industries to expand their respective roles in national economies. We've seen good examples of this in Jamaica. Both countries have done significant work with their cultural outputs, making them international brands that have transcended to revenue. In Jamaica, the ICT sector contributes between 6 and 8% annually to the gross domestic product. What, however, is a common thread throughout the regional economy is a strong intellectual property legislation. We believe it gives the innovators, designers, and software developers a level of comfort and security. It gives potential investors, whether foreign or domestic, encouragement to seek mutually beneficial partnerships in the local economies. It is critical that Guyana provides that kind of enabling environment. So that is the genesis of our discussion this evening. We have 3 panelists who graciously agreed to participate in this discussion. We have Mr. Teni, Housty, attorney at law, and who has shown a keen interest in the legislative side of the intellectual property framework. Mr. Enrico Woolford, principal of Capital News, longtime media practitioner, and one who has had practical experiences in the challenges of intellectual property enforcement. And last, but certainly not least, Mr. Dave Martins, band leader of the famous Tradewinds, and who has had extensive experience in the business of producing music. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to spend with us to discuss and provide your insights in this critical area of development. I think, first of all, we should see exactly where we are in terms of our legislative framework. It is not to say that we don't have any. It is to gain an understanding of what it is that we have, how relevant is it, and what it is that we need to do to improve our legislative framework. So I'll start with Teni for him to give us an idea of where we stand today.
Thank you, Lance, for having me this evening, and good to be on this panel. When we think about intellectual property rights, we're thinking about recognizing the intangible outputs of human activity. That's a great theoretical definition, or conceptualization. And when you think about that, certain categories come into mind. Patents, trademarks, copyrights. These are the technical labels. The state of our laws, they are old. 1930 origin for patents, designs, and trademarks. 1956 UK origin for copyrights. Interestingly enough, they're colonial based as well. So they weren't generated by Guyana for Guyanese. They were generated based on our colonial history. We have the new kid on the block growing based on that's geographical indications, and that was passed in 2005. So our laws are old, and they need updating to reflect a Guyanese reality operating in a regional and international framework. But that's where we stand right now. Old laws. I'm not saying anything about age really, but they just need to be updated.
So there's no real provision for new business, and by new business I mean information technology, software development, the way we produce music, the way we produce other cultural industries. As the laws currently stand, there is no provision for that in legislation.
The innovations in the method of expression would not fit easily into our existing laws. So we have categories of work. We have artistic works. We have literary works, we have dramatic works, we have cinematographic works, and those types of things. But the method of creating the work now would not be recognized. So digital works are not recognized easily within our laws. So that is and that's the first thing. As I say, before you get to protection, you have to deal with recognition first. And it is a challenge for these products to be recognized. I tell people, keep something digital if you want to go on the wrong side. But from the creative side, from the innovative side, you need to have something that recognizes that effort that goes into the creation of the work. And we do not do that easily right now.
All right. Let's move to Enrico. You are in the media production business, the television in particular, and you've been around for a long time. So perhaps you can share with us as well, your experiences in this area, and if you would have faced challenges in terms of the work that you produce and the business that you are trying to do, with the limitations that we may have in the legal framework.
Thanks, Lance. The real issue, as the Chief Parliamentary Counsel at the time, Cecil Dujon, said, even with the 1956 Act, we don't even administer the law in that regard. So it became difficult. And if I were to just look back at what happened in terms of intellectual property rights and so on, we've had great difficulty in trying even to get the administration at all times, not just the current administration, at all times to recognize that if you don't put these things in place, if you do not have proper copyright legislation, you do not have proper intellectual property rights legislation, you do not deal with patents and trademarks and service marks and what have you, then what you are doing is economic harm to the society. I mean, it always reminds me of the Intelsat Agreement, Article 14D of the Intelsat Agreement, that pointed out that if we were to put all the satellites in place, private satellites at that time, then it would cause economic harm to Intelsat. That was overcome by various other legislative and progressive developments in the satellite communication. But what has happened in copyright legislation is that we have not moved forward, as Teni said, with regard to updating the legislation. We've talked a lot about it. And I think, as Dr. Jagan once said, if talk could build a country, we would be the most developed country in the world. So we've talked a lot. But we've also done some movement in terms of the World Intellectual Property Organization. We've signed on to the Berne Convention and I think to the Rome Convention. I'm not sure about the Rome one, but I know on to the Berne Convention. And when Mr. Rohi was Minister of Foreign Affairs, with some amount of, arm twisting and so on, he moved in that regard to have the World Intellectual Property Organization people come down here and discuss with us, including the legislature, what ought to be done. But the great difficulty, I think, as Eddie Grant pointed out, is that we have not created that regime where people will feel comfortable to invest in terms of the creative industries. And as you're pointing out, in terms of software and development, where we attempted, and I mean ESPN and CNN because I was their marketing representative here for a time, when we attempted to do work in that area, it became a major challenge. You could not enforce copyright legislation because of the attitude to the society. We believe in this mango tree theory of stealing. If the mangoes hang over your yard, then you have some kind of legitimate right or expectation, as the lawyers would say, to taste the mangoes. So we believe in that from satellite penetration perspective. But at the same time, what we are doing is causing economic harm to our society by not enforcing and not updating the legislation so that we could move forward. And there was a prime example of that when EMW Communications, who had the responsibility for ESPN, said to the broadcasters in the society, look, you guys cannot show the Super Bowl. I think it was back in 9 to 4 or something like that. You cannot show the Super Bowl because you do not have the rights to it. We then had to get the NFL to point out that nobody in Guyana had the rights. We then had to get ESPN to say, yes, we have the rights internationally to the Super Bowl, and ABC News as a result of it. You had to get all those things. Then we went to the court to get it done. And I think Justice Jagnandan, God rest the dead, he was the one who had to rule on it. And he decided, well, look, I'm upsetting the apple cart here. He then decided, well, you guys go outside and solve the problem outside of the court. And of course, by that time, the Super Bowl would have come and passed if we had to go follow the law right through. So we need to update our legislation. We need to ensure that having signed on to these conventions, that we would follow those conventions, because it would bring economic good to the society and not cause the economic harm that we're having right now.
Thank you, Enrico. Dave, being in the music business for the time that you've had, and of course it's a business for you as well. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, I think first of all, what we're having here for the benefit of people looking on, this is really a door opening. What we're doing here. This is a very complicated subject, and there's a lot of aspects to it that would require more than we have in an hour or two or three. But I think from my experience in Guyana, there are two large problems. We've touched on one already, which is the absence of a law with teeth. One, and it's not enforced. Secondly, that's it, you could put into one basket. But I think the other problem is you cannot. I don't see us bringing in. Let us assume that the magic happens tomorrow, and the government decides, okay, we're going to bring this in. We're going to, as has been pointed out, update the legislation, give it relevance to today's time, and all that kind of thing. The other big stumbling block in there, which we have to tackle, and that has been alluded to as well, is the attitude in the society towards the subject. I think that is, to me, that is where the most work has to be done. Because you cannot go around enforcing something on a society that, frankly, the people do not understand. There are a lot of people in this community who do not understand what we're talking about when we're talking about copyright enforcement, and particularly with books is not so bad, because this is a book, by we copying this, we can't do that. It's in the intangible area where you run into this huge problem. The demand in St. Lucia says, is in the air, it's free, right? That is the biggest problem. You cannot get people to understand why they can't copy your CD. People come up to me and tell me, boy, I copied 25 of your CDs, sent 10 to Australia, and he thinks I'm feeling good about that. I said, you realize you're thieving my work? That's what is happening. I mean, you cannot go in the store and copy a General Electric television and go on the road and sell it. People understand that. They do not understand that you cannot go and take my CD and copy it and go on the road. They don't. They see nothing wrong with that. So the problem we're going to have as we try to start this engine is an engine that is not operating in this country. When you try to start this engine and you bring in the law to run the engine and you start to go to the courts, you're going to have a massive problem. You're going to have a huge public relations problem in this society, because the people have to, in other words, you have to, in parallel, as you're cranking up the legislation, you have to be running program after program, printed matter, broadcast matter, television, radio, community meetings, whatever, to educate people as to what this thing is. Because you're going to have serious problems when you go to a man running a bar, for example, a restaurant that is playing music, pipe music, and you tell him you have to get a license to play that music, which is what operates everywhere in the world. Well, everywhere in the world, most places. Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, those people have to pay. He's going to run you out of the place, you know. So that is the biggest problem I see here when we try to tackle this problem. We have to get if government is not on board 100% from the beginning, forget it. Because government not only has to change the law, they have to do the harder part, enforce it.
All right. We also have another challenge because this to some extent is a local industry. You can go to a business establishment and you can buy what are for all intents and purposes illegal DVDs and films.
But that's not just true here. Trinidad has that problem
Has that
still.
problem as well.
Barbados has it still. Jamaica still. Even though they have collecting agencies and enforcement, the problem is so invasive. It is still there. So I want to correct you slightly. It's not just about
No,
it's in the world.
In the
global
world.
problem.
In the world.
Yes.
But the challenge then is how do you these are people who would have gone into this as a business. They would have invested, they would have bought plant and equipment. I mean, you can argue about the legality of it, but certainly when you're going to make the case about improving legislation, improving enforcement, these are the sorts of things that you're going to have to answer. But what do I do? In this instance, the gentleman or the lady who goes down the road with these carts with music, all of that is so the pushback that you get.
But first of all, it's not the vendor, It's not the vendor. It's the guy behind the vendor, one. And two, that's exactly what I was saying before. Those are the people that you have to find a way to because that guy that's his little private economy, right? You have to find a way to educate him. The difference between here and outside, where piracy still obtains, most of those societies, those people understand that already. Our people are in a completely different category. What? The guy will tell you, right, you interfere in my way of living, There was just recently, the ministry got together with these vendors and tried to make them regulate and tone down and brought in all sorts of stipulations to help them stay in business. And nobody gave any thought to the musician whose work they're stealing for him to stay in business. You see? So that is the problem I think we have to fix. We have to we have to change attitudes, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a long time.
I sincerely agree. And one of the things you talk about investment, take away their investment. Just as how they have invested in their plant and equipment and everything else, take that away, because what they're doing is taking away the intellectual effort and investment of somebody else.
Right.
They are affecting and interrupting other person's interests, disrupting their interests.
I would put it even stronger. They're not taking it away. They're stealing. They are stealing somebody's product. I mean, that's the only way to put this thing. They are taking somebody's product and blithely copying it and selling it without investing 1 cent in that product.
Exactly.
So they're stealing,
And the serious issue here is that, as I was pointing out earlier, we don't realize the economic harm we are causing to the society by doing that, and we also don't look at the benefits to the society. Dave just mentioned Trinidad, Barbados, and Jamaica. And you earlier on mentioned the GDP, the input from the creative industry. Teni mentioned the fact that you need to update your legislation. If we were to do these things, then we would be able to go a lot further with regard to where we are right now. Look at where Barbados was. I always tell people years ago, when I was growing up as a kid, my dad used to laugh at the Bajan Calypsonian, because for some reason Barbados wasn't producing that type of music. And all of a sudden, Barbados is producing Rihanna. I mean, we have got to sit back and say, wait a minute. Jamaica has been able to produce a Marley and the whole gamut, string of people behind the Buju, the whole set of things. We are importing Jamaican artists to Guyana. Trinidad, in terms of calypso and soca and what have you, look where they've gotten. In spite of the fact that people will still steal on the side, right? what has happened to our industry? They've had to, like most artists in the country, be they writers or what, you have to leave the country to have your stuff protected. And that's something that Eddie Grant lamented more and more, Wilson Harris, all of our writers, all of our poets, all of our creative people. The ones who have been highly successful are those who are living in societies where their rights are protected. When you are here now, you are really at a disadvantage because a man, as Dave said, man don't care where he thieving you think. He don't even realize, well, he pretends not to understand that he's stealing your stuff. And I'm saying, because we do not deal with the content providers, deal with them in a right and legitimate way, right? We also don't deal with the carriers and say, well, look, you can't carry this stuff as Teni said, take away their investment. You can't carry this stuff. You can't use your industry to think. I think we should look at it from two perspectives. One, from the pharmaceutical industry. If people start to copy drugs and not keep at a standard, at a level, you know, we've got the new GPC and all other manufacturers. We must look at those things, the biodiversity issue in terms of our grammar, where we could get to if we were to deal with that kind of legislation, and of course the software and other issues. Educate people that they will understand, look, we will be better off if we do this than if we don't do it.
It's interesting that you mentioned UGPC. And I made a note here about the Lima Call CPL that is going on right now. That's a bundle of intellectual property rights coming out of Guyana. Imagine going to Caribbean countries and you're seeing Lima Call big there. They would be recognized there, but the level of respect that we get in our own country, that would be lower. Something is wrong. And the thing about it, when you boil it down, is a matter of respect for other persons. The percentage that you would have to give that right holder, it is nothing big, you know. It would be just a small part of the overall effort. Can't you share? And from that, you will build so many other aspects. Interesting, I mean, in Barbados, I was at Crop Over this week, and in Barbados, they would sing about anything. Would you believe one of the songs is about condensed milk? They sing about condensed milk. Another woman taking stock in her store, but they're playing the music, and these persons are being recognized because they respect the effort of somebody else. And that's where you start. Respect. Respect is part of your attitude.
I suppose we have to also work with our current content providers. Those who would do costumes for Mashramani, for example. I mean, we've heard the stories of people going and doing a presentation and being afraid to leave their drawings with the potential client for a second review because they're afraid it's going to be stolen. You know, people with the recordings, they refusing to leave them anywhere. For example, the Cine Guyana, where they had done about 4 or 5 films, and when they go and do features or doing any premieres, it's in a very controlled environment because they are very concerned about the protection of their content and the protection of their work. So I suppose that the next step now is the education, is to sit down and work with them to say, well, this is what the issues are. This is the value of the work that you do. And certainly for those who have the shops and the businesses that we spoke about, the argument should be made as well that for the sort of income and potential that this has, there might be a possibility of them still participating in the business, but certainly in a more structured way as opposed to what we're doing now.
And I think the two things must go in tandem. Those two things have to be there. That's why I'm saying if the government must be involved in this totally from the beginning. The government commitment has to be there to the law and to enforce and to educate. When, for example, cost cap starting in Barbados. Erica Smith, who is one of the principals in it. One of the biggest problems they ran into was this question of getting people to understand why you had a rum shop playing music and you have to pay somebody a license to play that music. It was a huge hurdle because they saw in retrospect that they should have done an education campaign in front to change attitudes so that people are not being suddenly told, well, what? I mean, when I first went to Canada, and this is before this whole IP thing started, and I heard about the place we were playing in, they had to pay a license. I said, what? I said, we're not playing American music, we're not playing recorded music, we're playing original music, our own. We're not playing anybody music. And I actually went and argued in law with them and they backed away. This particular, but most of the time, in those places, they don't have that excuse. They have to pay a license. And I heard, what? My own thinking had to be fixed in a sense. I mean, I'm talking 40, 50 years ago. But still, it is fundamentally what is going to happen here. So when we started to go at this problem, it is pointless to work as hard as we work to get the legislation right and to cover all the bases, and like you said, to make sure that the digital ingredient, which is new, that's another thing, you know. The digital idea is new, you know. Think about it. It's not 40 years old. It's brand new. A lot of us, wow, it's a strange thing. But we have to get those things together on the table at the same time as we go forward, or the situation, let me tell you, you're going to end up with people fighting people and licking down people when they get to that stage. You know, it has to be in parallel.
All right. Regrettably, time is against us, and we have to bring this to a close. This is the beginning of this discussion. The Georgetown Chamber of Commerce has taken this on as an initiative, and we'll work with all stakeholders in terms of the education, the awareness, even if it means the draft legislation, to begin to help with those things to see how we can move this process forward. Again, so this is the end of the program. Let me thank our viewers for being with us this evening. A brief footnote, the Chamber has noted with some concern that the Telecommunications Liberalization Act has been postponed again. We believe that the enactment of this legislation will be of tremendous impact to this country in terms of business, in terms of revenue, in terms of innovation. We would hope that all the stakeholders recognize this and hopefully after recess begin to look at this legislation seriously and pass it so we can move forward in the ICT and Communications Center. Thank you again for watching. Good night.